Hey guys, how's it going? I've recently gotten some questions around repotting houseplants, and I figured I'd do a video not just on how I repot my houseplants, but also explain the steps behind it and give a little bit more context in terms of why I'm doing certain things. So we're going to go ahead and spend some time looking at the roots, looking at some of the potting choices, and looking at some soil structure. The goal in this video is really to help you feel more confident, so you're not just following the steps of how to repot a houseplant, but you're really understanding why you're repotting that houseplant, because it might lead you to making some different decisions. And two things to keep in mind. One, this is for indoor houseplants only. I do my outdoor containers a little bit differently, and I am going to do a separate video on that, but at a time when it's not actually blizzarding outside like it is right now. And two, if something is different today than how you have done it, or you are doing it, or what you've done, and your houseplants are doing great and they're growing beautifully, don't touch it. Don't do it just because some lady said so on the internet. So don't change something that's not broken. These are just my ways of doing it and how I've found work for me. There are lots of times where I've seen other people do it differently and it works wonderfully for them, but it doesn't necessarily work for me because my climate's a little bit different. My different plants need different things, or I take care of it a little bit different. My lighting's different, whatever it may be, may not necessarily work for others. So just keep that in mind. My greatest advice before I get into any of this is just to experiment. Take a really cheap common plant that you can find in your area, a ZZ plant, a pothos, and just experiment. Don't be afraid to learn just by trial and error. Nothing bad is going to happen. I mean, the worst case scenario is the plant doesn't make it and you're out a few bucks. But that's really how you learn. That's how everybody learns best. It's not necessarily just by watching videos or just by reading books. You have to go out there and learn and do it yourself as well. So these types of videos give great guidance, but it doesn't really do anything if you don't actually just start. All right, so let's get into it. How do we know when a plant needs to be repotted? So a couple of things will tell you. One is that it gets a little bit too top heavy, so it's always kind of flopping over and falling over. But the most obvious way is that you are just watering too frequently, and that typically means that the plant is root bound. Now, root bound means that the roots have now become so congested in the pot that there is actually more roots in the pot than there is soil. So for me, if I look at this philodendron, and if I pull it out of the pot very gently, this philodendron has a lot of roots, but there is still a lot of soil in here. So I don't feel that this is root bound. I see a lot of roots, but I don't think that this philodendron needs to be repotted. I think it's still going to be just fine in this pot for at least another 6 months, possibly a year. This, I believe it's a type of jade plant, but I don't remember exactly the variety. There is barely any soil left in here, and the water literally just runs straight through the sides. You can tell by the puckering on the leaves and the fact that they're like soft and mushy that it has just been dried out too much. This needs repotting. So that means that I need to bump this up to the next size container. So containers typically come in increments of 2 inches, 2, 4, 6, 8, blah, blah, blah. So this is a 6-inch container. So I'm going to be bumping it up to an 8-inch container. You don't want to go from a 4-inch container to an 8-inch container, 6-inch container to a 10-inch container. You want to just go up one pot size. And the reason being is if you pot it up into too large of a container, there's just going to be too much soil in there, and there's a high possibility of root rot because that soil will just be sitting there moist and soggy, and there's no roots to really suck up the excess moisture, which will then cause the root rot. The other thing that's really important, so while we're inspecting the roots, you really want to base your pot size off the root ball, not the leaf canopy. So if I didn't look at the roots here, and I just look at the leaf canopy of this, I would want to pot this up into something that was potentially really too large for it, then causing added stress and the root rot that I was just mentioning. So make sure that you are picking your pot size based off of your root ball. It's really important. Your roots are really what tells you everything about the plant. The health, the soil that it needs, the water that it needs, all those things. So you really, really need to look at the root zone to be able to kind of determine what that plant needs. Now, since we're already looking at the roots, also look at what kind of roots the plant has. So the plants can have really fine hair-like roots. The plants can have really chunky, fibrous, bulbous roots. That really tells you two kinds of things. One, the kind of soil that you're going to want to plant it into, and also the watering needs of that plant. Something that has a really fine root system is going to need to be watered a little bit more frequently. Something that has a root system that is a lot chunkier, like a philodendron or something like that, that tends to hold on to moisture a lot longer. So you want to make sure that the chunkier the root, the chunkier the soil is. So what I tend to do is when I get my soil, I either add some LECA balls or some orchid bark into the mixture to make that soil a little bit more light and airy for those roots to go into, and also for the water to drain through a little bit easier. For this plant right here, it has very fine roots. So I don't need to make sure that it's very, very chunky soil. So now let's talk about the soil for a second. You want to make sure, no matter what type of root system you have, that your soil is light and airy. You don't want anything that compacts too quickly. And that is really the biggest reason why I stay away from something like a Miracle-Gro product. I have found that soil compacts so quickly and it almost suffocates the root system of my plants. Now, some people may have great luck with it, and that's fantastic. They should keep using it. I tend to stay away from it. So I tend to go to my local garden centers, and the brands that I gravitate towards are Espoma, Fox Farm, or Coast of Maine. They are just the easiest ones to get. I really like the quality of their soil. Some of them are a little bit chunkier than others, so I may amend it a little bit more. Like, for example, Coast of Maine, I find to be a little bit more dense, so I tend to add a little bit more orchid bark or LECA balls into it just to make it a little bit more light and airy. It's just something, those are just the brands that I tend to like a little bit more. What are LECA balls? So LECA balls are just clay man-made pebbles that basically wick moisture up to the root ball. They allow for two things. They allow for the soil to stay evenly moist, but they also allow for air and oxygen to flow through the root balls. So no matter what I'm planting, I always add a little bit of LECA balls into the soil just to help make sure, because I found that it really helps ensure that the plant doesn't get root rot for those exact reasons that I just listed. Now, you can also add a slow release fertilizer into the soil, or you can just use liquid fertilizer. That is totally just a personal preference. Slow release fertilizer is basically just a fertilizer that sits in your soil, and it does exactly what it says. Think of it almost like as an IV drip, where every time you water the plant, it releases a little bit of fertilizer out into the soil so that the plant can benefit from that. If you're not doing that, you can always use a liquid fertilizer. You have a little bit more control on that. You can do it at certain times of year. You can do it whenever you want. So that really is just a personal preference. I tend to always forget to add a slow release fertilizer into the soil, so I use liquid fertilizer. it really doesn't, it doesn't matter. What I have started doing recently is using a product called mycorrhizae. It is just a beneficial fungus that helps aid in root growth. I got this off of Amazon. I do like it. There's quite a few different brands out there if you want to do some research on it. But I always have started, in recent months, I want to say, I have always started adding this to the mixture if I'm repotting, just to aid in that root growth. Okay, so we've talked about looking at the root ball. We've talked about different types of soil, and we've talked about how we want to amend our soil if we want to. We've talked about what size pot to look at. What we haven't talked about is what kind of pots there are out there. And there are three main ones that I typically come across. There is your terracotta planters. They typically tend to be this coloration. They tend to get a beautiful patina over time as you water the plants more and more. They are a porous material, meaning that they will wick moisture away from the plant and allow really good air circulation. That also means that the plant will dry out a lot faster. So if you have a plant that needs a lot of water, you should not plant it directly into terracotta. You can plant it into a nursery pot and then put it into your terracotta planter, but I would highly recommend not to put it directly into terracotta because it will constantly be dry and you will just be basically working against it to keep it watered, well watered. If you have a plant that likes to really dry out between waterings, terracotta is a really great option. Then you have your ceramic planters. Those tend to be a lot more decorative. I really like to use them around my house. I strongly advise for you not to plant directly into a ceramic planter. Many of them don't have drainage holes, and even the ones that do hold on to moisture for so long that the chances of your plant getting root rot are very, very, very high. So what I would recommend instead is plant your plant into a plastic nursery planter and then put it into your decorative ceramic pot. You want to make sure that your ceramic planter has a drainage hole, and if it doesn't, that you are dumping the water out after every watering so that it's not just sitting in the bottom reservoir and then your plant is then sitting in that water rotting the roots. The last type of planter is your plastic nursery planter. I think we've all seen them. They come in a variety of colors. They are not that decorative, but they are just your basic black or green or sometimes a terracotta colored plastic planter. They hold on to moisture longer than terracotta, but not as long as ceramic, so they are a great option. And so if you ever have any questions in terms of what type of pot you're planting into, my best advice would be to first plant it into a nursery container and then put it into a more decorative container, even if it's terracotta, because it's just a little bit more foolproof that way. So today I'm going to be, like I said, planting it from this 6-inch terracotta planter. I'm going to be planting it directly into this 8-inch terracotta planter. So I am going to put on gloves, which I know there might be some people out there in YouTube land that make fun of me for it. I didn't used to wear gloves, and there was one time where I went to get my nails done and I could just tell by the look on the guy's face that he was kind of grossed out with the amount of dirt that I had around my fingernails. I had just come out from gardening. So after that, I was like, well, maybe I should use some gloves. So that's why we're doing that. Now, this particular planter has a very small drainage hole, so I'm not concerned about the soil going through the drainage hole as much. If you do have a planter that has a much larger drainage hole, you can place something at the bottom of the planter. You can place anything from a coffee filter to a window screen. I've even seen people use broken pieces of terracotta pots. You just want to make sure water can still get through. You do not want that drainage hole plugged up, because then we're back to the root rot situation. So whatever you place at the bottom of your planter, just make sure that water can absolutely make its way out. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is just fill the bottom with a little bit of water, and you can see how chunky it is, how light and airy, and you can see that I have some LECA balls in here. And so I have a nice layer at the bottom. I'm gonna take my little jade, and I am going to snuggle her in. Now the mycorrhizae, I just kind of sprinkle around. The important part of mycorrhizae is that it does need to be touching the roots for it to actually do anything. And now I just backfill. And then I make sure that she's centered and straight. So now what we have to do is water her in. And if you notice that the water is just sitting on top of the soil and isn't actually being absorbed into the soil, that means that the soil is a little bit too compact. So what you want to do, you can do one of two things. You can either stick some chopsticks down, not aggressively, but you just are creating some air pockets to allow some channels for the water to actually flow in, and it'll help loosen up the soil. The other thing that you can do is bottom water. So by bottom watering, all I'm saying is take a container, fill it with water, stick the pot in for a couple hours, and let that water wick up into the root ball area, and you'll notice that the soil actually gets a lot more moist that way. Both ways are a great way to help combat any water not being able to seep down into the root ball area of your plant. And you really want to make sure you're not watering here. There are no roots up here for the water to be soaked up into the plant. You're watering the base of the plant, and you want to make sure you're getting all around the plant so that it is evenly moist. All right, I have watered her in, and I'm ready to go set her on a beautiful windowsill. So I hope this video helped clear up some confusion. Hopefully you're not more confused than you were previously. And I hope to gave you some confidence, not only to understand the steps of the process, but to also understand the why behind it and why we do some of the things that we do and the choices that we make. Anyway, drop me a comment below. Let me know if you guys have any other questions or if there are any other steps or things that I missed. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.